When Elvis stepped on stage, someone yelled, "You're a fake artist," and the entire concert stopped. But Elvis's response to that man turned an enemy into his biggest fan. And by the end of that night, 12,000 people were giving a standing ovation, not to Elvis, but to him. March 24th, 1974, Las Vegas International Hotel. In the heart of the city that never sleeps, inside this magnificent building, a night that would go down in music history was about to unfold. Elvis Presley was living through one of the brightest periods of his career. Even though he was approaching 40, his stage energy hadn't diminished one bit. If anything, it had grown stronger. The experiences he'd lived through, the pain and triumphs, had added depth to his voice and brought maturity to his performances. Las Vegas wasn't just another stage city for Elvis. This was his second home. Since 1969, he'd been performing regularly in this city, creating his own unique following. Every concert was an event, every performance a legend. People came from all over America, hell, from all over the world, just to see Elvis in Vegas. That evening, the International Hotel lobby was buzzing with unprecedented activity. Hotel staff, security guards, press members, and of course the fans. Everyone was there for the same reason, to see Elvis Presley. His white rhinestone-studded jumpsuit, mesmerizing stage presence, and legendary voice had captivated millions. That night, the 12,000-seat venue was packed to the rafters. Everyone wanted to see Elvis, touch him, breathe the same air as him. Sitting in the middle section was a man who stood out from all the other fans. Frank "Bulldog" Martinez, 42 years old, a construction worker from Phoenix. His broad shoulders, hard stare, and the lines on his face showed he'd lived a tough life. His hands were calloused, his skin bronzed from the sun. He'd been working construction for 20 years, and life had never been easy on him. Frank's dislike for Elvis wasn't just about musical taste. There were deeper, more personal reasons behind this hatred. He couldn't stand seeing show business artists make easy money while hard-working, honest people struggled to get by. In his eyes, Elvis was the symbol of this injustice. Frank actually loved music. He'd listen to Johnny Cash, hum along to Hank Williams songs. There were real musicians, real artists in his book. But Elvis was different. To Frank, he was a phony. "This guy ain't a real musician," he'd tell his buddies. "He just looks good and moves around. Real artists ain't like that." This prejudice actually came from Frank's own life struggles. Every morning at 6 a.m., he'd get up, work heavy jobs under the scorching sun, then come home exhausted. And when he saw Elvis on TV, this easy lifestyle really got under his skin. The reason Frank was even there was his wife, Maria. Maria was one of Elvis's biggest fans, and as a birthday gift, she'd asked Frank to come to this concert with her. Frank had agreed so he wouldn't hurt his wife's feelings, but deep down, he carried a huge prejudice against Elvis. Maria Martinez, 38, was a beautiful and gentle woman. She worked as a nurse, and Elvis's music had supported her through tough times, especially during their early marriage years. When Frank was unemployed, Elvis's songs had given her hope and lifted her spirits. "This guy's fake," Frank muttered before Elvis came on stage. "This ain't real music. Real artists ain't like this." Maria was uncomfortable with her husband's attitude. "Please, Frank, let this night be for me. Just listen. Maybe you'll change your mind." Frank shrugged. "Won't change. I know these fake artists all too well." But Maria wouldn't give up. "Frank, look, this man makes millions of people happy. Can all these people be wrong?" "They can be," Frank said firmly. "People get fooled easy. They see shiny things and forget the truth." These words hurt Maria, but she didn't want to argue that night. On this special day, she wanted to have a good time with her husband, not fight. At 9:30 p.m., the lights went down and Elvis walked on stage. The place went absolutely crazy. Women were screaming, men were cheering. Elvis grabbed his microphone and started, "Thank you very much," with that magical voice of his. Elvis was especially on fire that night. His white rhinestone jumpsuit sparkled under the lights. Every movement was like a magical dance. His voice was powerful, clear, and emotional. He used the stage like like it was his own home, creating different energy in every corner. When the first song ended, the whole place stood up. The applause was deafening. Elvis smiled and greeted the crowd. "Good evening, Las Vegas," he shouted. "I'm so happy to be here with y'all tonight." The second song was Burning Love. Elvis swung his microphone around, got the crowd even more excited with those famous hip moves. Women were screaming like they were gonna faint. Men were clapping along to the beat. But Frank sat there like a statue in the middle of all this excitement, arms crossed, stone-faced, watching the stage. No matter how energetic Elvis got, Frank's attitude didn't change. "Look at him showing off," he whispered in Maria's ear. "Same moves, same tricks." Maria was embarrassed by her husband's attitude. While everyone around them was having a blast, their section felt like a cold island. The third song was Hound Dog, one of Elvis's classics. The place went wild again, but Frank didn't react at all. Sometimes he'd even close his eyes, acting like he was bored. The fourth song was gonna be Can't Help Falling in Love. Elvis walked over to the white grand piano center stage and started playing that tender melody. The arena fell into magical silence. Everyone held their breath, focused on Elvis's voice.
That's when Frank couldn't take it anymore. He jumped to his feet and yelled at the top of his lungs,
"You're a fake artist." His words echoed through the entire venue. Elvis suddenly stopped, his hands frozen on the piano keys. 12,000 people turned to stare at Frank in shock. The place went dead silent. Frank didn't stop there. "This ain't real music. You just wear flashy clothes and sell fake emotions." Elvis slowly stood up. There was no anger or surprise on his face, just deep sadness and understanding. "Sir," Elvis said, his voice carrying through the entire venue thanks to the microphone. "What's your name?" Frank was a little surprised, but kept his resolve. "Frank Martinez." "And I'm telling the truth." "Frank Martinez." Elvis repeated the name like he knew him. "You from Phoenix, Frank?" This question surprised Frank even more. "Yeah, but how do you know that?" Elvis smiled. "Because Frank, you didn't come here to listen to music. You came here to prove something. And I understand that feeling real well." The venue was completely silent. Everyone wondered what Elvis was gonna do. "Frank, can I ask you something?" Elvis continued. "What do you think makes real music?" Frank stumbled a bit. Real music comes from the heart. Not fake stuff. Real feelings." "You're right," Elvis said, surprising Frank. "You're absolutely right. Real music comes from the heart." Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, getting closer to Frank. "Frank, I got a proposition for you. How about you come up here and show me what real music is?" The suggestion shocked everyone in the venue. Security guards didn't know what to do. Maria anxiously waited to see what her husband would do. Frank hesitated for a moment. I ain't a singer." "Doesn't matter," Elvis said. "You know real musicians, so sing something from your heart. The mic's yours." Elvis's behavior caught Frank completely off guard. He expected Elvis to fight with him, to get thrown out by security. Instead, Elvis was inviting him on stage. "No, Frank started backing down. "You scared, Frank?" Elvis asked gently. "Don't you want to know what it feels like to stand in front of 12,000? This challenge hit Frank's pride. "I ain't scared." "Then come on up here, show us real music." Frank, under his wife Maria's worried gaze, started walking toward the stage. People made way for him, some grumbling, others watching curiously. When he got on stage, Frank's heart was pounding. Elvis came up to him and extended his hand.
"Welcome to the stage, Frank. You're in front of 12,000 people now."
Frank shook Elvis's hand and realized something. Elvis's hand was warm, genuine. There was no hatred in his eyes, just understanding. "Now, Frank," Elvis said, "show me real music." Frank looked at the microphone, then at the crowd of 12,000. His throat went dry. His hands started shaking. I don't know what to say," he admitted. Elvis came closer and spoke quietly. "Frank, let me tell you a secret. I felt the exact same way when I first got on stage. I was scared. I was shaking. But then I realized something.
What?
These people ain't here to judge me. They're here to feel something. They're human just like me. They got pain, joy, hopes too. Frank looked at the crowd again. This time he saw something different. Not angry faces, but curious, understanding faces. Frank, Elvis continued, why did your wife Maria give you this concert as a gift? Frank's eyes filled with tears. Because I lost my job last month. I was real depressed. She was trying to cheer me up. And how did you feel when you came here? Angry. Because Frank stopped, hesitating to tell the truth. You can say it, Frank. Because I couldn't stand other people being happy. I was miserable, so why should they be happy? Elvis nodded. I understand. And what do you feel now? Frank was quiet for a while. Then he got close to the microphone and spoke.
Now I get it. You're just trying to make people happy, and I was trying to stop that.
The venue was completely silent. The sincerity in Frank's voice touched everyone. This tough, rough man had suddenly become a very different person. The fragility in his voice, the tears in his eyes showed just how lonely and hurt he really was. A few bravo voices rose from the audience. People respected Frank's courage. Frank, Elvis said, wanna try singing? Something simple. You know Amazing Grace? Frank nodded. Yeah, I know it. My mom taught it to me when I was little. This sentence opened a window into Frank's past. His childhood, his mother, the innocence he'd lost. It all came flooding back. My mom was a real religious woman, Frank said, his voice trembling. Every night before bed, she'd sing this song. Frankie, she'd say, don't forget this song. It'll give you strength on hard days. Elvis's eyes filled with tears. Your mom was right, Frank. That's the power of music. Perfect. Let's sing it together then, Elvis said. Elvis went to the piano and played the first notes of Amazing Grace. Frank stood with the microphone, still shaking but more determined. He could feel the magnitude of this moment. When the song started, a magical atmosphere filled the venue. Elvis's powerful, soft voice blended with Frank's shaky but sincere voice. They came from different worlds, but in that moment they shared the same feeling. Elvis began, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Frank joined in tentatively. His voice was rough but sincere. That saved a wretch like me. They continued together. Frank's voice started getting stronger as he sang that old hymn. Childhood memories, his mother's voice, lost hopes, everything came back. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Tears were streaming down Frank's face, but this time they weren't tears of anger. They were tears of relief. Was blind, but now I see. When the song ended, the venue was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, and slowly one person started clapping, then another, and within seconds, 12,000 people were on their feet applauding Frank Martinez. Frank looked at the crowd in amazement. These people were applauding him. The same people who had been angry with him, who had criticized him, were now showing him respect. Tears streamed down his face, but this time they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of happiness. Some people in the crowd were crying too. Frank's story reminded them of their own life struggles. Everyone had hard days, pain, disappointments, and Frank's courage in sharing his pain gave them courage too. Incredible, shouted a woman in the audience. Look at this man's courage.
Bravo, Frank. Someone else called out.
Elvis came over and put his hand on Frank's shoulder. Frank, that's real music. It came from your heart. Frank turned to Elvis, tears in his eyes. I apologize to you. You're a real artist. I was just hurting and taking it out on others. This apology wasn't just to Elvis, but to the whole venue. Frank was letting go of the anger, jealousy, and pain he'd carried all this time. We all hurt sometimes, Frank, Elvis said. What matters is supporting each other. You showed real courage tonight. Elvis took the microphone and addressed the crowd. Folks, we witnessed something very special tonight. Frank Martinez showed us real courage, the ability to make mistakes, apologize, and change. The crowd applauded again. Frank, Elvis continued, let's make this night unforgettable for you. Where's your wife, Maria? Maria shyly raised her hand. Elvis called her on stage too. When Maria got on stage, she was in tears. She'd never seen her husband like this. So open, so vulnerable, so real. Maria, Elvis said, your husband Frank taught us something very valuable tonight. That with love and patience, we can change people. Then Elvis turned to Frank. Frank, I got an offer for you. Tomorrow afternoon, we got a recording session in the studio here. Would you like to come record record Amazing Grace, a professional recording. Frank couldn't believe it. Really?
Really? Because that song you sang tonight was more valuable than any recording I've made in years.
The rest of the night was like a dream for Frank. He stayed on stage with Elvis, joined him on several more songs. After each song, the crowd applauded him. Frank wasn't just a spectator anymore. He was part of the performance. During Love Me Tender, Frank and Elvis sang together. Frank's voice was now more confident, more open. That feeling he'd forgotten since childhood came back. The pure happiness that music gives. During Blue Suede Shoes, Elvis even taught Frank to dance. The 42-year-old construction worker was dancing on stage next to Elvis, and the venue was going wild. The most emotional moment came during How Great Thou Art. Singing this gospel song, Frank completely let himself go. He remembered his mother, his childhood, the innocent days he'd lost. And now here, singing next to a man loved by millions, he was getting that innocence back.
When the concert ended, Frank and Maria were invited to Elvis's dressing room. This special invitation made other fans in the venue jealous, but nobody objected. Frank had earned this invitation.
In the dressing room, Elvis was very different. Not the magical figure from the stage, but a warm, genuine, humble person. He talked with Frank for a long time, listened to his story, shared his life philosophy. "Frank," Elvis said, "you taught me something very valuable tonight. Sometimes the harshest criticisms come from people who are hurting the most. And when we respond with understanding instead of anger, miracles can happen." When Elvis learned about Frank's unemployment situation, he immediately took action. "You're gonna get a phone call tomorrow morning," he said. "I know contractors in Las Vegas. I'll introduce you to them." Frank couldn't believe it. "You'd really do that for me?" "Of course. Tonight you became my friend, and friends help each other." The next day, Frank really did come to the studio. They recorded Amazing Grace together, and this recording was kept in Elvis's personal archives. This recording had all the magic of that night: Frank's vulnerability, Elvis's compassion, and the special bond between them. After the recording session, Elvis introduced Frank to his friend Tony Benedetto, owner of one of Las Vegas's biggest construction companies. Tony couldn't refuse Elvis's special request.
"Elvis told me your story," Tony said, shaking Frank's hand. "You're a brave man. I like working with people like that."
Frank started work the next week. His salary was better than what he'd made in Phoenix, and he had job security. But most importantly, the anger and jealousy inside him was gone. But the real miracle started after that. Frank's story from that night spread rapidly through Las Vegas. First word of mouth, then local newspapers wrote about it, then TV stations covered it. Headlines across America read, "Man who insulted Elvis becomes his biggest fan." This story wasn't just news. It had a huge impact on society. People started questioning their own anger and pain. They started thinking, am I being unfair to others too? Similar stories started coming in. People wrote letters sharing their own transformation stories. Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker, announced that the number of these letters exceeded 10,000 within a month. This story was especially meaningful during a time of intense racial tensions. The bond formed between a white worker like Frank and an artist like Elvis showed that people from different backgrounds could come together. 6 years after Martin Luther King Jr.'s death, America was still struggling with racial discrimination issues. Frank's story was a hopeful example of how prejudices could be broken down. Psychology professors started telling this story in their classes. It was used as an example in anger management courses, marriage counseling, even child education. 3 months later, Frank got a job at a music studio in Las Vegas. He started working as a sound technician. With Elvis's help, his life had completely changed. Now he was inside music, not in a sector he hated. Frank's new job gave him a completely different perspective. Working in the studio, he met many artists. He saw that they all had their own struggles and difficulties. He realized that artists were people too, that they also suffered and struggled. "I used to think artists were people who made easy money," Frank said in an interview. "But now I see they work just like us, just in a different way." Frank's courage and Elvis's understanding approach inspired inspired many people. Similar stories started coming in. People shared their own anger and pain and how they were able to change. Especially during a time of intense racial tensions, Frank's story carried great meaning. The bond that a white worker formed with an artist like Elvis showed that people from different segments could come together. Frank and Maria went to every Elvis Las Vegas concert until 1977. Every time, Frank was in the front rows, but this time applauding and singing. Elvis would also give Frank a special greeting when he saw him. A special friendship had formed between them. This friendship wasn't limited to concerts. Elvis would sometimes invite Frank to his home, Graceland. Frank and Maria got the chance to know Elvis's private life too. During these visits, Frank better understood what a humble, genuine person Elvis was. "He's the same Elvis even at home," Frank would say. "No conceited side at all, always thinking about others." In the summer of 1977, Elvis's health started deteriorating. Frank was one of the first to notice this. When he visited Elvis after a concert, he found him different than usual. "Elvis, you okay, brother?" Frank had asked. Elvis had smiled, but there was fatigue in his eyes. "I'm fine, Frank. Just a little tired." That night, Elvis had talked with Frank for a long time. His life philosophy, his music career, his future worries, like they were talking for the last time. He shared everything. "Frank," Elvis had said, "you taught me a lot. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected places." When Frank learned of Elvis's death in 1977, he was in tears. He hadn't just lost an idol, but a real friend. He attended the funeral, and the words he spoke that day are still remembered. "Elvis taught me to love music, but more importantly, he taught me to love humanity. He saved my life. I went to him as an enemy. I left as a friend." At the funeral, when Frank approached Elvis's coffin, he pulled out a small piece of paper from his pocket. On this paper was a letter he'd written after that unforgettable night. "Dear Elvis, thank you for the mercy you showed me. You're not just an artist, you're a teacher. You taught me that I was looking at people with my prejudices, not my heart. I'll be grateful to you forever. Frank Martinez." This story is still told in Las Vegas today. Elvis's former employees still tell about what happened that night, because that night wasn't just when a concert stopped. It was when a person changed, when anger transformed into love. In 2020, Frank Martinez passed away. He was 88 and continued telling the story until his last breath. He'd share the story with his grandchildren, neighbors, everyone he met. At Frank's funeral, there was an unexpected guest, Presley. Elvis's ex-wife had attended Frank's funeral and delivered this message to the family. Frank Martinez held a special place in Elvis's life. This story was one of the most beautiful examples of Elvis's character. Frank's courage and Elvis's mercy should be an example to all of us. Frank's story also received great attention in academic circles. Social psychology courses at Harvard University and conflict resolution courses at Yale included this story in their curriculum. "This event is a perfect example of how prejudices can be broken," says Dr. Jennifer Matthews, a social psychologist. "The empathy Elvis showed Frank was a perfect application of modern conflict resolution techniques." Frank's son, Mike Martinez, turned his father's story into a book, From Enemy to Friend. My Father's Meeting with Elvis was published in 2019 and quickly made it to the bestseller list. "My dad would always say," writes Mike Martinez, "there were two Franks that night, the Frank before going on stage and the Frank after. They were the same man, but one was angry, the other understanding." In the book, Mike details his father's transformation after that night. Frank's outlook hadn't just changed toward Elvis. His entire outlook on life had completely changed.
"My dad used to look at everything negatively, always criticizing," says Mike. "But after that night, he'd try to understand first, then judge. This change didn't just change his life, but our whole family's life.
life. Frank's story caught Hollywood's attention in the 1980s. Famous director Francis Ford Coppola announced he wanted to turn this story into a film. However, Frank opposed having his life turned into a Hollywood movie. "This story ain't for making money. It's for teaching people," Frank had said. "If it becomes a movie, the message gets lost, and only entertainment remains." Instead, Frank preferred to tell his story in documentary format. The Night That Changed Everything, filmed in 1985, won an Emmy Award and was shown in many schools for educational purposes. Frank's narration of that night in the documentary was truly moving.
"When I got on that stage, I thought my heart was gonna explode. 12,000 pairs of eyes were looking at me, but there was no hate in Elvis's eyes, just understanding. That's when I realized that the truly strong person responds with love, not anger."
Frank's story also caused changes in the music industry. Many artists inspired by Frank started interacting more with their audiences during concerts. Famous country music star Dolly Parton said when she heard Frank's story, "Elvis taught us not just music, but humanity too. Frank's courage should be an example to us all." Johnny Cash was a close friend of Elvis's and knew Frank's story well. In an interview Cash gave in the 1990s, he said, "As someone who knew Elvis closely, I'm telling you, he wasn't just a singer. He was a healer, a peace ambassador." That incident with Frank shows Elvis's true character perfectly. Frank's story resonated not just in America, but worldwide. In England, the BBC included this story in their most inspiring stories of the 20th century list. In Japan, this story was associated with samurai culture's philosophy of treating one's enemy with respect. In the 1990s, Frank went on world tours to tell his story. He gave talks at universities, conferences, and conflict resolution seminars. Every time he gave the same message: anger is easy, understanding is hard, but real courage is choosing the hard path. The most moving part of Frank's talks was when he reenacted that night. He'd get on stage and describe his feelings, fears, and shame from that time. Most of the audience would be moved to tears. "I had that microphone in my shaking hands, feeling 12,000 people looking at me," Frank would say. "But when I stood next to Elvis, I felt as comfortable as if I were at home. This man's heart was so big that it absorbed all my anger and gave love in return." Frank's story was also adapted into children's books. Frank and Elvis, A Friendship Story, an illustrated book published in 1995, taught children about empathy, understanding, and fighting prejudice. The book's author, Sarah Johnson, said after interviewing Frank Martinez's story is the purest humanity lesson children can understand. It shows how anger can transform into love. In the 2000s, Frank remained active despite his old age. Even at 75, he was giving seminars at universities. He loved talking to young people because he thought they were more open to change. "Young people haven't filled their hearts with too much anger yet," Frank would say. "It's easier to show them the right way." Frank's granddaughter, Jessica Martinez, started sharing her grandfather's story on social media. Videos on Instagram and YouTube were watched millions of times. Generation Z especially showed great interest in Frank's story. "If Grandpa had experienced in 1974 what he did today, it probably would have gone viral," says Jessica. "But back then there wasn't technology like this. It took years for the story to spread. Now it would take minutes." Frank's impact didn't stay just at the individual level. Many companies started using Frank's method in conflict resolution training. This approach, called the Elvis approach, taught how to approach angry customers with empathy. Human resources specialists taught their employees using Frank's story. When you encounter an angry customer, first try to understand why they're angry. Most of the time, there's pain underneath the anger. Frank's story also started being used in therapy. In anger management sessions, therapists showed Frank and Elvis's story as an example. "This story is proof that transformation is possible," says Dr. Robert Chen, famous psychologist. "The change Frank experienced shows how flexible human nature can be." In the 2010s, the Frank Martinez Peaceful Resolution Center was established in Las Vegas. days. The center was created inspired by Frank's story and offered various conflict resolution services. The center's founder, Linda Thompson, said, "Frank Martinez's story shows us that even our greatest enemies can become our friends. We just need to find the right approach."
Frank gave his final speech in 2015 at age 81, in that old hall in Las Vegas, right where he met Elvis. That day, every seat in the venue was full. People had come to hear this legendary man one last time.
41 years ago, I came on this stage as an enemy, Frank said, his voice trembling. Today, I address you as an ambassador of friendship. This is the greatest lesson Elvis taught me. Love is stronger than anger. Understanding is stronger than prejudice. In the final part of his speech, Frank reenacted that unforgettable night one last time. He sang Amazing Grace, and the entire venue joined him. In that moment, the magic from 41 years ago was relived. After the speech, Frank, who received a standing ovation, left these final words: "Elvis left us long ago, but his message lives on. And that message is this: every heart can change. Every anger can turn to love. Believe it and live it." Frank Martinez's story shows us that sometimes the harshest words come from the deepest pain. And when we respond to those words with understanding instead of anger, transformations can happen. What Elvis did that night wasn't just a performance. It was a lesson in humanity. Real music comes from the heart, Frank had said that evening. And Elvis proved it to him, not just by singing, but by approaching with his heart. That's why that night, 12,000 people applauded not Elvis, but Frank, because Frank became a real artist that night. One who sang from his heart, shared what he felt, and was genuine. And Elvis, he just showed him the way. Like a teacher, like a big brother, like a friend. That's why Elvis wasn't just the king. He was a teacher of humanity. And Frank Martinez's story was one of his most valuable lessons. If this incredible story of turning conflict into compassion moved you, make sure to hit that like button and share this video. Tell us in the comments which aspect of Elvis impressed you the most. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you don't miss more amazing true stories about the moments that reveal the best of human nature.